Straight ahead, squaring off. President Biden and former President Trump duke it out in their first debate in 4 years. How our panel reacts to what they said.
You're destroying our country.
You're a whiner when you lost the first time.
One-on-one, Texas Senator John Cornyn criticizes the ATF's recent rule change for gun sellers and expresses optimism Republicans will retake the U.S. Senate. Veep sweepstakes. Grassroots Republicans in North Texas tell us who they'd like to see as Trump's running mate and why. Good Sunday morning to you. I'm Jack Fink. Get your fix for Texas politics. Eye on Politics starts now. Hello and welcome. We begin with the big debate. The first time President Joe Biden and former President and presumptive Republican nominee Donald Trump went face-to-face in 4 years. It was the earliest presidential debate ever and featured no studio audience, and microphones were muted for the candidate not asked a question. This debate certainly has a lot of people talking. I spoke with Republican Michael Williams, a former Texas Education Agency commissioner and former railroad commissioner, along with former Democratic State Representative Lorraine Birabeel of Dallas.
I think it's substance versus style. I think it's pretty apparent for anyone who was paying attention. One person just wasn't telling the truth all night. The other person was telling the truth, but may not have had the style points we would have liked. But I think for the most part, the biggest part about this race is that the contrast is clear. And I think many people know where they're at.
Michael.
Biden bombed. You cannot win an election in a debate, but you can dang sure lose one. And last night they lost it. I'm glad the president has a 6 handicap on the golf course because he's going to have some free time. He's going to be able to use it.
And we're hearing Democrats are in panic mode. They are freaking out. They are concerned. Some of them are saying, look, Biden cannot run again. He needs to drop out of his reelection bid. Are you hearing these things, Lorraine, and do you agree with them?
I'm actually not concerned about it. You know, when President Biden chose Kamala Harris as his vice presidential nominee, she is a strong choice, remains doing a great job in that role. And any president, right, they choose a running mate just in case something happens, right? And so I'm confident that if she were called to step to the plate, if that was a decision he made, but I think it's a decision for the president to make alone. But in terms of what we're doing as a country and how things are going, this is a person that brought us out of the devastation of the pandemic. This is a person who is actively and making an impact on reducing inflation. And people can see that. At the end of the day, what we can't have, and I think most voters will agree, is another 4 years of President Trump.
What's very, very interesting, and last night both of them had different responsibilities. They had different things they needed to accomplish. For Trump, he needed to contrast and compare himself, his administration, with that of President Biden's. But he had to do so without being a total jerk about it. And he accomplished that. For President Biden, he had to reassure Americans that he had the mental capacity and the physical stamina and endurance to be the president. So to talk about what he did thus far in his career as president is almost irrelevant, because the question is, can he go forward? Does he have the mental capacity going forward for the next 7 months of this term and for 4 more years? Does he have the physical ability to be president of the United States? And I think last night voters clearly saw that he does not.
All right, I want to play some clips of the debate. And first, we're going to hear the back and forth on border security, obviously a top issue here in Texas. It has been for a decade. And there were various points during the debate in which President Biden lost his train of thought. And we'll see that in this clip. Let's take a look.
I've changed it in a way that now you're in a situation where there are 40% fewer people coming across the border illegally. It's better than when he left office. And I'm going to continue to move until we get the total ban on the total initiative relative to what we're going to do with more Border Patrol and more asylum officers.
President Trump?
I really don't know what he said at the end of that sentence. I don't think he knows what he said either. Look, we had the safest border in the history of our country. The border, all he had to do was leave it. All he had to do was leave it. He decided to open up our border, open up our country to people that are from prisons.
All right, so Lorraine, we'll start with you. Your thoughts on the back and forth and on the fact that President Biden did occasionally at some points lose his train of thought.
I think this goes back to what we were talking about at the very beginning of this. We have one person who literally lied the entire conversation. Talked about insulin, for example, something that got done 2 years after Trump left office. I mean, that's a fact. We are talking about, on the other side, someone who is honest with you. And I think the American people, we're going to have to make a decision. Do we want someone who actually gets results, which is, President Biden? Or do we want someone who's going to just lie to us all day and possibly take us down a path where we no longer have a democratic process? Because that is some of the things that we're hearing on the other side in terms of their plan for 2025.
Michael.
Well, Lorraine, let's be clear. There was hyperbole and falsehoods on both sides. When President Biden says that no American soldier had lost their lives during his tenure as president, ask the 13 American families who had a loved one get killed in Afghanistan. When he says that no insurrectionists, no terrorists had come across that southern border, when there are 10,000 folks illegally coming across that border every month, surely we know that there have been terrorists who've come across. So there have been falsehoods on both sides.
We also want to play another clip. This was on inflation, which is also a huge issue.
The economy collapsed. There were no jobs. Unemployment rate rose to 15%. It was terrible. And so what we had to do is try to put things back together again. And that's exactly what we began to do. With a combination, what I was left with in corporate greed is the reason why we're in this problem right now.
He also said he inherited 9% inflation. No, he inherited almost no inflation, and it stayed that way for 14 months, and then it blew up under his leadership because they spent money like a bunch of people that didn't know what they were doing, and they don't know what they were doing.
Where do you think voters are on this particular issue?
And I actually do agree with the president, rightfully so, right? At the time that he was sworn in, he was dealing with, we were still in the firm grasp of the pandemic. We had a president at the time, President Trump, who told us that the virus was not airborne. And, we want to talk about lives lost. Let's think about all the people we lost to the pandemic and how many of those lives were preventable had proper information been delivered.
You asked the question about inflation and how do Americans respond to it and what do they think about it. I think most Americans, irrespective of what the number is, whether it was 15, whether it was 9, that's not what concerns most Americans when they're sitting in their home. They're looking at the fact that milk costs more than it used to, that gasoline costs more than it used to, that it's harder for young people and young families to buy homes, that it's harder to be able to take care of my family. That's what American families are asking about, and that's what they see.
So one of the things now that Democrats have been talking about is the fact that, okay, if President Biden decides to drop out and not run for re-election, he would have to relinquish his delegates. And then the DNC would have to decide who would be the nominee. It doesn't go right to Vice President Kamala Harris. Democratic candidates who are interested will have to fight it out according to the DNC rules. And so it raises the question again, is somebody in the Democratic Party going to be going to President Biden, going to be going to First Lady Jill Biden and urging them to step aside? And there was a clip last night after the debate of the First Lady congratulating the president. Let's take a look.
Joe, you did such a great job. You answered every question. You knew all the facts. And let me ask the crowd, what did Trump do? Yes.
All right, so Michael, we'll start with you on this. What are your thoughts after watching that?
Well, I think, within the first couple hours after a very, very dreadful debate performance, that's exactly what he's supposed to do. You're supposed to come out and talk about how you're going to continue going. That's no different than the boxer that gets hit across his head and almost gets knocked out and he shakes it off like, I'm okay. That's exactly what you're supposed to do. Let's wait till we get to Sunday. Let's wait till we get later down the road. And after these conversations marinate about him having to get off that ticket.
Lorraine.
I think the average American voter, obviously the ones that are paying attention watch the debate, right? And the ones that are paying attention know that there's a clear contrast here, right? I don't know that there are that many persuadables, honestly. I think this election really comes down to who is going to get their base out and what part of the base is going to stay home because they're disgusted based on character issues, right? Or what have you. And so I think that's really what this is going to come down to.
The next presidential debate is set for September 10th. Coming up, Senator John Cornyn tells us why he's so critical of the new ATF rule on gun sellers and why he believes the Republicans will take back the U.S. Senate when Eye on Politics returns. Welcome back to Eye on Politics. Now our one-on-one interview with Senator John Cornyn. In Dallas last week, he expressed optimism that Republicans will retake the majority in the U.S. Senate. He also criticized the ATF's controversial rule change on gun sales that's tied to a bipartisan bill he passed after Uvalde.
They rewrote the law that I negotiated.
So you disagree with it?
Oh, I do, yes. And unfortunately, that's what happens these days when you act in good faith to work with on a bipartisan basis. Then to have agencies like the Department, like the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms basically rewrite it, I think, discourages that sort of cooperation. But here's the issue. The law has always been the case that if you were a gun dealer, that you had to have a license to do that from the federal government, a federal firearms licensee. All FFLs do background checks. And so the goal was to make sure that people who are actually doing manufacturing firearms or selling firearms for a business would become licensees and do background checks. But they went further and tried to restrict informal sales between friends, family, and neighbors, and that was never the intent of the law we negotiated.
How confident are you about Senator Cruz's Senate race and also some of these other Senate races, and whether the Republicans are going to be able to retake the Senate next year?
Well, I'm optimistic that the Republicans will take the majority in the Senate in November, and starting with Senator Cruz's race here in Texas. The latest poll I've seen shows him up by 11, but I know that Senator Cruz is not taking any of this for granted. He had a very close race in 2018, and obviously I think learned a lot from that in terms of being prepared for what is coming at him in this race. But all these are national races. But I like our chances in places like West Virginia, Montana, and Ohio. But there's a broad map, a lot of opportunities in Maryland, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Arizona, just to name a few. So I think there's a very good chance that my party will have the majority in the Senate come November.
You are running for Senate leadership. You know the other people obviously very well who are running. And so I'm wondering, why do you think you have an edge, and what do you think the key to your victory would be?
Well, I've been in the Senate a long time now, and I've seen the Senate work well, and I've seen the Senate broken, and I believe that it's currently broken. So I'd like to take the benefit of that experience and try to help President Trump, should he be elected, and right now I think he's got the best chance of being elected, pursue his agenda. And I can do that by setting the agenda, working with the administration. One of the things the Biden administration wants is for the tax provisions that we passed in 2017 to expire in 2025. That will result in a $3 trillion tax increase, a tax increase for 62% of taxpayers. We've got to we've got to fix that, and I believe that I would be in a position to make sure that we get that done.
A new study by the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Health shows the impact of Texas's abortion laws. Sarah Jenkins explains in this week's brief.
In Texas, the infant mortality rate increased and more babies died of birth defects after the state passed a restrictive abortion law in 2021. The mortality rate for infants went up 8% compared to 2% in the rest of the country. Birth defects increased 23% compared to a 3% decrease in the U.S. The 2021 law banned abortions after a fetal heartbeat is detected. But following the overturning of Roe v. Wade in 2022, the state implemented a near-total abortion ban. There is an exception if the mother's life is at risk, but doctors have argued the law's language is too vague. Last week, the Texas Medical Board expanded its guidance on dangerous pregnancies and said the risk to a pregnant woman's life or major bodily function does not need to be immediate in order for an abortion to be allowed.
Coming up, grassroots Republicans in North Texas tell us who their top choices are for vice president when Eye on Politics comes right back. After Thursday night's debate, former President Donald Trump's pick for vice president may become more important. The people he's reportedly considering are his former HUD Secretary, Dr. Ben Carson, North Dakota Governor and former presidential candidate Doug Burgum, Florida Senator Marco Rubio, Ohio Senator J.D. Vance, House Republican Conference Chair Elise Stefanik, Florida Congressman Byron Donalds, and South Carolina Senator Tim Scott. We spoke with grassroots Republicans from North Texas about who they'd like to see as Trump's vice presidential nominee.
I think there are really two broad buckets that they could look at. The first is kind of an individual who satisfies the more nationalist, populist movement that President Trump has really been at the forefront of moving the conservative and Republican Party more generally. Someone who's in favor of a strong national identity, immigration and border policy. So someone like a J.D. Vance or a Vivek Ramaswamy, someone who can really be an articulate expositor of that particular ideological vision and the policies that President Trump is running on. And then the second bucket would be someone who is perceived as being more temperamentally or dispositionally moderate, who might actually even be more popular outside of the party than within it. So someone like a Nikki Haley or a Tim Scott, who could be more appealing to someone who is a moderate, an independent or a suburbanite. So if I was advising the campaign, I would look at somebody who could swim convincingly in both of those lanes, someone like a Marco Rubio or a Glenn Youngkin, who's done a phenomenal job as governor in Virginia, someone who can help make the ideological case, be Trump's wingman, but has popularity outside the party as well, because at the end of the day, the goal is to win. So whatever it takes to get to that point.
And Jonathan, your top three and why?
Sure. My top pick right now would be J.D. Vance. If you look at his biography, he grew up in a part of America, experiencing America, just really struggling like a lot of Americans are now, was able to overcome those things, go to an Ivy League school, served in the military, so he's got a military background. He knows what it takes, or the cost of sending someone to war, and he's fully on board with Donald Trump's agenda. He's also young and would be a great successor in 2028 if the ticket wins here in 2024. So J.D. Vance would be my top choice. I would say the second and third, probably kind of tied, would be Tim Scott of South Carolina, Senator Scott. Just always a happy warrior, conservative. I think he would complement Donald Trump quite well. And then maybe the third option, similar to what Sanjay mentioned, someone that is maybe a little bit out of Donald Trump's lane, but can appeal to a more moderate voter, Doug Burgum, who dropped out of the presidential race, but the governor from North Dakota, just very steady hand on the wheel type, who I think would complement Donald Trump very well.
I like J.D. Vance. He's kind of an easy pick, I think, but I think he leaves an opportunity for a successor that I think is very positive. He's still a young guy. I think JD is a conservative choice. I like some of the names that the others have mentioned that are kind of more moderate, but I think JD is a safe choice. And I think he will be supported by the base, and I think he'll make the base come out and support the entire ticket. Yeah, I like Marco Rubio. I don't know that Marco would fit the bill nationally. I think he's more of a regional candidate, being from South Florida, and I don't know that he still has the big recognition that he had maybe several years ago, maybe the first time he ran. But I would say those are the two picks that I like. I don't know that there's a third.
I like Nikki Haley. I think she can bring in a base that is not yet committed to Trump, and that is always good. I like Dr. Ben Carson. I think he can bring an element that can also bring voters that are not yet there, and it brings a different kind of attitude to the campaign. And I also like Tim Scott. Biden has a woman on his ticket. Even RFK Jr. has a woman on his ticket. It's kind of sad that we as Republicans don't, we show up at these fights. We show up to a gunfight with a knife, and this is going to be a fight unlike any other fight we've had before. Trump is really good with having his base pretty solid. I don't think he needs to get someone to help add to the base.
Mr. Trump has said he would announce his running mate before or at the Republican National Convention, which begins July 15th in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. That's all for Eye on Politics this week. I'm Jack Fink. I am listening, and we are listening at CBS News Texas. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again next week. Happy 4th of July this Thursday. And from all of us here at CBS News Texas, have a great Sunday.